Hello, my name is Trace. I'm from the state of Kansas within the United States. I would like to introduce to you this channel consisting of English with a subtitle.
How to Develop Self-Confidence and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Chapter 6, The Secret of Good Delivery. Shortly after the close of the First World War, I met two brothers in London, Sir Ross and Sir Keith Smith. They had just made the first aeroplane flight from London to Australia, had won the $50,000 prize offered by the Australian government, had created a sensation throughout the British Empire, and had been knighted by the King. Captain Hurley, a well-known scenic photographer, had flown with them for over a part of their trip, taking motion pictures. So I helped them prepare an illustrated travel talk of their flight and trained them in the delivery of it. They gave it twice daily for 4 months in Philharmonic Hall, London, once speaking in the afternoon and the other at night. They had had identically the same experience, had sat side by side as they flew halfway around the world, and they delivered the same talk, almost word for word. Yet somehow it didn't sound like the same talk at all. There is something besides the mere words in a talk which counts. It is the flavor with which they are delivered. It is not so much what you say as how you say it. I once sat beside a young woman at a public concert who was reading Paderewski played them the notes of a mazurka by Chopin. She was mystified. She couldn't understand. His fingers were touching precisely the same notes that hers had touched when she had played it, yet her rendition had been commonplace, and his was inspired, a thing of surpassing beauty, a performance that held the audience enthralled. It was not the mere notes that he touched. It was the way he touched them, a feeling, an artistry, a personality that he put into the touching that made all the difference between mediocrity and genius. Bruhov, the great Russian painter, once corrected a pupil's study. The pupil looked in amazement at the altered drawing, exclaiming, "Why, you have touched it only a tiny bit. That is quite another thing." Bruhov replied, "Art begins where the tiny bit begins." That is as true of speaking as it is of painting and Paderewski's playing. The same thing holds true when one is touching words. There's an old saying in the English Parliament that everything depends upon the manner in which one speaks and not upon the matter. Quintilian said that long ago, when England was one of the outlying colonies of Rome. I have often noticed in college contests that it is not always the speaker with the best material who wins. Rather, it is the speaker who can talk so well that his material sounds best. 3 things matter in a speech. Lord Morley once observed with gay cynicism. Who says it, how he says it, and what he says, and of the 3, the last matters the least. An exaggeration? Yes, but scratch the surface of it and you will find the truth shining through. Edmund Burke wrote speeches so excellent in logic and reasoning and composition that they are today studied as classic models of oration in half the colleges of the land. Yet Burke, as a speaker, was a notorious failure. He didn't have the ability to deliver his gems, to make them interesting and forceful. So he was called the dinner bell of the House of Commons. When he arose to talk, the other members coughed and shuffled and went out in droves. You can throw a steel-jacketed bullet at a man with all your might, and you cannot make even a dent in his clothing. But powder behind a tallow candle, and you can shoot it through a pine board. Many a tallow candle speech with powder makes, I regret to say, more of an impression than a steel-jacketed talk with no force behind it. Look well, therefore, to your delivery. What is delivery? What does a department store do when it delivers an article you have bought? Does the driver just toss the package into the backyard and let it go at that? Is merely getting a thing out of one's own hands the same as getting it delivered? The messenger boy with a telegram delivers the wire into the direct possession of the person for whom it was intended. But do all speakers? Let me give you an illustration that is typical of the fashion in which thousands of people talk. I happened on one occasion to be stopping in Murin, a summer resort in the Swiss Alps. I was living at a hotel operated by a London company, and they usually sent out from England a couple of lecturers each week to talk to the guests. One of them was a well-known English novelist. Her topic was the future of the novel. She admitted that she had not selected the subject herself, and the long and short of it was that she had nothing to say about it that she really cared enough about saying to make it worthwhile expressing. She had hurriedly made some rambling notes, and she stood before the audience ignoring her hearers, not even looking at them, staring sometimes over their heads, sometimes at her notes, sometimes at the floor. She called off her words into the primeval void with a faraway look in her eyes and a faraway ring in her voice. That kind of performance isn't delivering a talk at all. It has no sense of communication, and that is the first essential of good talking, a sense of communication. The audience must feel that there is a message being delivered straight from the mind and heart of the speaker into their minds and their hearts. The kind of talk I have just described might just as well have been spoken out in the sandy, waterless wastes of the Gobi Desert. In fact, it sounded as if it were being delivered in some such spot rather than to a group of living human beings. The secret of good delivery. An entirely new school of speaking has sprung up since the Civil War. In keeping with the spirit of the times, it is as direct as a telegram. A modern audience, regardless of whether it is 15 people at a business conference or 1,000 people under a tent, wants the speaker to talk just as directly as he would in a chat, and in the same general manner that he would employ in speaking to one of them in conversation. In the same manner, but not with the same amount of force. If he tries that, he will hardly be heard. In order to appear natural, he has to use much more energy in talking to 40 people than he does in talking to one. Just as a statue on top of a building has to be of heroic size in order to make it appear of lifelike proportions to an observer on the ground. At the close of Mark Twain's lecture in a Nevada mining camp, an old prospector approached him and inquired, "Be them your natural tones of eloquence?" That is what the audience wants, your natural tones of eloquence, enlarged a bit. I have just described the delivery of a certain novelist. In the same ballroom in which she had spoken, I had the pleasure of a few nights later of hearing Sir Oliver Lodge. His subject was Atoms and Worlds. He devoted to it more than half a century of thought and the study of experiment and investigation. He had something that was essentially a part of his heart and mind and life, something that he wanted very much to say. He forgot, and I, for one, thank God he did forget, that he was trying to make a speech. That was the least of his worries. He was concerned only with telling the audience about atoms, telling us accurately and lucidly and feelingly. He was earnestly trying to get us to see what he saw and to feel what he felt. And what was the result? He delivered a remarkable talk. It had both charm and power. It made a deep impression. He was a speaker of unusual ability, yet I am sure he didn't regard himself in that light. A good window does not call attention to itself. It merely lets in the light. A good speaker is like that. He is so natural that his hearers never notice his manner of speaking. They are conscious only of his matter. Henry Ford's advice. All Fords are exactly alike, their maker used to say, but no two men are just alike. Every new life is a new thing under the sun. There has never been anything just like it before and never will be again. A young man ought to get that idea about himself. He should look for a single spark of individuality that makes him different from other folks and develop that for all he is worth. Society and schools may try to iron it out of him. Their tendency is to put us all in the same mold. But I say, don't let that spark be lost. It's your only real claim to importance. All that is doubly true of public speaking. There is no other human being in the world like you. Hundreds of millions of people have 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth, but none of them look precisely like you, and none of them have exactly your traits and methods and cast of mind. Few of them will talk and express themselves just as you do when you are speaking naturally. In other words, you have an individuality. As a speaker, it is your most precious possession. Cling to it, cherish it, develop it. It is a spark that will put force and sincerity into your speaking. It is your only real claim to importance. Sir Oliver Lodge spoke differently from other men because he himself was different. The man's manner of speaking was as essentially a part of his own individuality as were his beard and bald head. If he had tried to imitate Lloyd George, he would have been false. He would have failed. The most famous debates ever held in America took place in 1858 in the prairie towns of Illinois between Senator Stephen A. Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was tall and awkward. Douglas was short and graceful. These men were as unalike in their characters and mentality and personalities and disposition physiques. Douglas was the cultured man of the world. Lincoln was the rail splitter. Douglas's gestures were graceful. Lincoln's were ungainly. Douglas was utterly destitute of humor. Lincoln was one of the greatest storytellers who ever lived. Douglas seldom used a smile. Lincoln constantly argued by analogy and illustration. Douglas was haughty and overbearing. Lincoln was humble and forgiving. Douglas thought in quick flashes. Lincoln's mental processes were much slower. Douglas spoke with the impetuous rush of a whirlwind. Lincoln was quieter and deeper and more deliberate. Both of these men, unlike as they were able speakers because they had the courage and good sense to be themselves. If either had tried to imitate the other, he would have failed miserably. But each one, by using to the utmost his own peculiar talents, made himself individual and powerful. Go and do likewise. That is an easy direction to give, but is it an easy one to follow? Most emphatically, it is not. As Marshall Folk said of the art of war, it is simple in its conception, but unfortunately complicated in its execution. It takes practice to be natural before an audience. Actors know that. When you were a little boy or girl 4 years old, you probably could, had you but tried, have mounted a platform and recited naturally to an audience. But when you are 20 and 4, or 40 and 4, what will happen if you mount a platform and start to speak? Will you retain that unconscious naturalness that you possessed at 4? You may, but it's dollars to donuts that you will become stiff and stilted and mechanical and draw back into your shell like a snapping turtle. The problem of teaching or of training people in delivery is not one of superimposing additional characteristics. It is largely one of removing impediments, of freeing them, of getting them to speak with the same naturalness that they would display if someone were to knock them down. Hundreds of times I have stopped speakers in the midst of their talks and implored them to talk like a human being. So in the end, even this matter of delivery comes back to the thing which has already been emphasized repeatedly in these pages, namely, put your heart in your talks. Do you do these things when you talk in public? First, stress important words. Subordinate unimportant ones. Here's an example. Read the following quotation striking the words in big type hard. Run over the others quickly. What is the effect? I have succeeded in whatever I have undertaken, because I have willed it. I have never hesitated, which has given me an advantage over the rest of mankind. Napoleon. This is not the only way to read these lines. Another speaker would do it differently, perhaps. There are no ironclad rules for emphasis. It all depends. Read these selections aloud in an earnest manner, trying to make the ideas clear and convincing. Don't you find yourself stressing the big, important words and hurrying over the others? If you think you are beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but soon or late the man who wins is the one who thinks he can. Anon. Perhaps there is no more important component of character than steadfast resolution. The boy who is going to make a great man, or is going to count in any way in afterlife, must make up in his mind not merely to overcome 1,000 obstacles, but to win in spite of 1,000 repulses and defeats. Theodore Roosevelt. Second, change your pitch. The pitch of our voices in conversation flows up and down the scale from high to low and back again, never resting, but always shifting like the face of the sea. Why? No one knows, and no one cares. The effect is pleasing, and it is the way of nature. We never had to learn to do this. It came to us as children, unsought and unaware, but let us stand up and face an audience, and the chances are our voices will become as dull, flat, and monotonous as the alkali deserts of Nevada. You can make any phrase or word that you choose stand out like a green bay tree in the front yard by either suddenly lowering or raising your pitch on it. Dr. S. Park Cadman, the famous congressional minister of Brooklyn, often did it. So did Sir Oliver Lodge. So did Bryan. So did Roosevelt. So does almost every speaker of note. In the following quotations, try saying the italicized words in a much lower pitch than you use for the rest of the sentence. What is the effect? I have but one merit, that of never despairing. Marshall Folk. The great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. Herbert Spencer. I have lived 86 years. I have watched men climb up to success, hundreds of them, and of all the elements that are important for success, the most important is faith. Cardinal Gibbons. Third, vary your rate of speaking. When a little child talks, or when we talk in ordinary conversation, we constantly change our rate of speaking. It is pleasing, it is natural, it is unconscious, it is emphatic. It is, in fact, one of the very best of all possible ways to make an idea stand out prominently. Walter B. Stevens, in his Reporter's Lincoln, issued by the Missouri Historical Society, tells us that this was one of Lincoln's favorite methods of driving a point home. He would speak several words with great rapidity, come to the word or phrase he wished to emphasize, and let his voice linger and bear hard on that, and then he would rush to the end of his sentences like lightning. He would devote as much time to the word, or two, he wished to emphasize as he did to half a dozen less important words following it. Such a method invariably arrests attention. To illustrate, I have often quoted in a public talk the following statement by Cardinal Gibbons. I wanted to emphasize the idea of courage, so I lingered on these italicized words, drew them out, and spoke as if I myself were impressed with them, and I was. Will you please read the selection aloud, trying the same method, and note the results? A short time before his death, Cardinal Gibbons said, I have lived 86 years. I have watched men climb up to success, hundreds of them, and of all the elements that are important for success, the most important is faith. No great thing comes to any man unless he has courage. Try this. Say $30 million quickly and with an air of triviality so that it sounds like a very small sum. Now say $30,000. Say it slowly. Say it feelingly. Say it as if you were tremendously impressed with the hugeness of the amount. Haven't you now made the 30,000 sound larger than the 30 million? Fourth, pause before and after important ideas. Lincoln often paused in his speaking. When he had come to a big idea that he wished to impress deeply on the minds of his hearers, he bent forward, looked directly into their eyes for a moment, and said nothing at all. This sudden silence had the same effect as a sudden noise. It attracted notice. It made everyone attentive, alert, awake to what was coming next. Lincoln also paused after the phrases he wanted to emphasize. He added to their force by keeping silent while the meaning sank in and affected its mission. Sir Oliver Lodge paused frequently in his speaking, both before and after important ideas, paused as often as 3 or 4 times in one sentence, but he did it naturally and unconsciously. No man, unless he were analyzing Sir Oliver's methods, would notice it. By your silence, said Kipling, you shall speak. Nowhere is silence more golden than when it is judiciously used in talking. It is a powerful tool, too important to be ignored. It is usually neglected by the beginning speaker. A speaker may follow the directions I have set down in this chapter and still have 100 faults. He may talk in public just as he does in conversation, and consequently, he may speak with an unpleasant voice and make grammatical errors and be awkward and offensive and do a score of unpleasant things. A person's natural method of everyday talking may need a vast number of improvements. Perfect your natural method of talking and conversation, and then carry that method to the platform. Summary. There is something besides the mere words in a talk which counts. It is the flavor with which they are delivered. It is not so much what you say as how you say it. Many speakers ignore their hearers, stare over their heads or at the floor. They seem to be delivering a soliloquy. There is no sense of communication, no give and take between the audience and the speaker. That kind of attitude would kill a conversation. It also kills a speech. Good delivery is conversational tone and directness enlarged. Everyone has the ability to deliver a talk. If you question the statement, try it out for yourself. Knock down the most ignorant man you know. When he gets on his feet, he will probably say some things, and his manner of saying them will be almost flawless. We want you to take that same naturalness with you when you speak in public. To develop it, you must practice. Don't imitate others. If you speak spontaneously, you will speak differently from everyone else in the world. Put your own individuality, your own characteristics, manner into your delivery. Talk to your hearers just as if you expected them to stand up in a moment and talk back to you. Put your heart into your talking. Real emotional sincerity will help more than all the rules in Christendom. Here are 4 things that all of us do unconsciously in earnest conversation. But do you do them when you are talking in public? Most people do not. Do you stress the important words in a sentence and subordinate the unimportant ones? Does the pitch of your voice flow up and down the scale, from high to low and then back again, as the pitch of a little child does when speaking? Do you vary your rate of speaking, running rapidly over the unimportant words, spending more time on the ones you wish to make stand out? Do you pause before and after your important ideas? The end.